Agreed.
So what we're gonna do? So the premise behind this podcast and the name is the Mount Rushmore Wrestling Podcast. So what we did for our first episode, our inaugural episode, we really want to talk about our specific Mount Rushmores. Where this episode we're gonna do the men. We will do the women, either next week or the next couple weeks for that Mount Rushmore as well. But we really want to talk about our Mount Rushmore wrestling. Again, we are fans starting in 2000 and 2001, that era. We are not huge on, we respect the legends of wrestling. We don't typically, I don't typically have Hulk Hogan or Ric Flair on my Mount Rushmore. Do I think, if I'm overlooking in wrestling terms and importance, do I think they should be on there? Yes, absolutely. For me, this is my time of watching and what I know best, and what is on my Mount Rushmore. Feel free, absolutely, to interact with us and let us know who's on your Mount Rushmore. We'll be posting a lot of different things, different places. So we definitely want to hear from you because there's definitely an argument. We have honorable mentions as well. There's arguments, I would probably say, for a good 10 people to be on this list. I think it's tough to really get down to 4. And we'll kind of talk about that as we kind of go in. And I think it's very interesting to talk about what takes precedence over other things. Is it wrestling? Is it mic skills? Is it overall impact? The Mount Rushmore wrestling for us is, the 4 best guys that, that wrestling overtakes. It is all included in that. So it's an all-inclusive environment for those 4 people, what that means. And maybe each of us have some differences as well, which we do, and that'll look a little bit different. So I'm going to kick it off with my first on the Mount Rushmore. My first is Stone Cold Steve Austin. So Stone Cold, in my opinion, I think people who do not watch wrestling know who Stone Cold Steve Austin is. Granted, there's probably a few other people that they know, but Stone Cold, to me, when he came back last year, you just knew it was going to be a big money match. Whether he is the best wrestler or not, in hindsight, he is not the best wrestler. We can be honest with that. But the absolute control this man has over an audience, I think, is second to none. There's one other guy that I think is very close, but the pop that man gets in any situation, I think, is what puts him, far and above anyone. And some of the best moments in terms of segments come from this man. The CEO, when he was CEO for the day, all the incidents he had, the beer truck, all of these things, the moments, the feuds with The Rock, with Triple H, with Vince McMahon. This man, is why I, fell in love with professional wrestling originally, because, I would watch him when I was 7, 8 years old, and I would be so fascinated that this guy was just loud-mouthing on TV. And he just encapsulated the audience. And I think it's really hard to do that at the level that he does it, because he can still do it to this day just by walking out and hearing that glass shatter. It just says everything about him. The other thing is, I don't think people understand, how accomplished he was, too, because, when we're talking about accomplishments and titles and championships, and I'll kind of go over for each guy what they have, it's pretty incredible. So 6-time WWE champion, 2-time Intercontinental champion, 3 Royal Rumble victories. That is, above in itself. And he's a Hall of Famer. He was a Triple Crown champion. This man, honestly, could do no wrong in the ring. He started off, obviously, as a different character, too, studying Steve Austin. He went through the trenches. But that man tells you exactly what wrestling is. And he could have an argument, I'm pretty sure, with this wall that I'm looking at. So it's just incredible. So Stone Cold is my first.
So for my first, I'm going to go with The Undertaker. And there's a lot of reasons specifically. So for number one, I feel like anyone that's been around and is aware of Undertaker is a 30-year career, the longevity factor. And it's, in terms of accomplishments, he's got plenty himself. 7-time world champion, world tag team champion 7 times, 2007 Royal Rumble winner. He's had many different variations of himself. So he had the Phenom character, American Badass, Big Evil. He basically, every character that he displayed in every rivalry he had, whether it's with Orton, with Triple H, Shawn Michaels, The Rock, Vince, like he basically, that storyline with each one was always going to be very telling. And match quality was always great. He was a very good wrestler. He wasn't the best wrestler, but he was top tier though. And to me, he had some of the best movesets with the Last Ride, Tombstone Pile Driver, Old School, which I think is one of the most like impressive moves for a guy his size, being over 300 pounds, balancing yourself on the turnbuckles, on the ropes. And I think, not to mention, he's got the best WrestleMania streak, which is his iconic. He was 21-0 before he did end up losing to Brock Lesnar, 21-2 overall. And to me, he's got two of the top 5 matches of all time with Shawn Michaels at WrestleMania 25 and the Hell in a Cell with Triple H at WrestleMania 28. So I think all those factors align why Triple H basically was very important factor for Undertaker in the rivalry. Then Undertaker's basically how he goes back to the business. He helped motivate, like we just talked about Bray Wyatt factor, the fact that he basically looked up to him. So Undertaker is definitely someone you look up to. And he had the most feared entrance music of all time, just to add that in the mix as well. So to me, those reasons are why Undertaker is my number one.
And the longest.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, my first is also going to be The Undertaker. Sean listed his accomplishments, so I don't have to do that, but he's got the most WrestleMania appearances of all time at 27 matches, which is incredible, and that doesn't even, like, compare to just appearances he's made at WrestleMania and not had a match. I mean, he's a Hall of Famer. He's won the Royal Rumble one time. Something that I thought was very interesting was I was looking at PWI, and he was never ranked the best wrestler of any year that he wrestled. The closest he ever was number 2 in 2002. But that just goes to show that you don't have to be the best wrestler to be on Mount Rushmore. And exactly. I think Undertaker is probably had one of the greatest impacts in wrestling history. And to me, he's going to go down as probably the greatest of all time. So that's my number one. It's got to be Undertaker.
We can do it snake style, so Chris, why don't you give us your second?
All right, well, my second is Jeremy's first, so Stone Cold Steve Austin, going back to that. He was the greatest superstar of the best era in wrestling history. The Attitude Era is the best era of all time, and he was ranked number 1 by PWI in 98 and 99, which was kind of the height of the Attitude Era. Like Jeremy said, he's, a 3-time Royal Rumble winner. He's won the championship 6 times, 2-time Intercontinental, so he's got all those accolades. He won the King of the Ring, so that's another one for him. And honestly, it's kind of surprising. Out of everybody that I have on my list, including honorable mentions, he's had the least amount of WrestleMania appearances, with 7. He's 5-2 at WrestleMania. He beat The Rock 2 times. He beat Scott Hall in a match. He lost to Bret Hart in one of the greatest WrestleMania matches of all time. And then he comes back in 2022 and fights Kevin Owens in the main event of night 1. And he took some bumps that I didn't think he was going to take. So, if he can come back after 19 years and have the match that he put on, you're one of the greatest of all time, and you're on the Mount Rushmore.
Perfect. So for my number 2, I'm going to go with John Cena. And now, when basically going off what Chris said, that ruthless aggression, basically Attitude Era being the number 1, and I do agree with that. So I'm going to basically go to the next era after that, which is most of our childhood. John Cena, to me, was the king of the ruthless aggression era. He came at a time that was like right in between Attitude Era and ruthless aggression. It was like around the summertime. I think it was June of 2002. And he started the battle rap culture where basically ended up saving him. Like, he came up with the gimmick, and he was basically like, it was life or death as far as his WWE career, and it went over with the audience. And then from 2002 to 2006 primarily, that was like the peak of like that character, and he was probably went over with the crowd the most during that time period. And 16-time world champion. He was a 2-time Royal Rumble champion in 2008 and 2013. 3-time U.S. champion, and he also innovated the U.S. Basically open challenge that he would basically implement a lot, which was very important, which all basically develop the up and coming guys.
Some of the best matches ever.
Absolutely, and he was probably the most popular babyface character of all time. And two of the best rivalries during the Ruthless Aggression era to me was him versus Edge and Orton. So plenty of feuds and matches and storylines that were developed through his tenure down there.
For sure, yeah. Those 2009 Orton, what a menace. That bald Orton, you could never get enough of him.
Could not.
My next is there first, so I will go with The Undertaker. Not much else needs to be said, but, over 30 years in the wrestling business, I think to be able to do it for that long, you see some other people now, crossing that benchmark, and it's really incredible. But not many can say that they've done that. I think The Undertaker as a character and gimmick is probably the best gimmick of all time, and I don't know if that'll ever be touched ever again. I think that something that was developed over 30 years, and as Sean said and as Chris said, reinvented multiple times in different ways, The Undertaker understood that he needed to adapt himself with the times. So when they were in the Attitude Era, he went to Badass Biker Taker. That is like something that you don't really think about from someone that was literally an Undertaker, like dark, gothic character, literally an Undertaker with Paul Bearer, to this guy that rides a Harley down to the ring, and it's really something to kind of revel in. And then he switched back and forth. I just think the character development for him was incredible, and just the longevity for his career. And don't get me wrong, has Undertaker come back a few too many times here or there? Yes, sure. And examples could be like the Goldberg match that we always make fun of in our friend group.
Best match ever.
Crown
That wasn't really
jewel.
his fault. That wasn't really his fault, right? So, Goldberg almost killed him.
Has life taken away that fight.
Crown Jewel is another one.
Yeah, it's very much, yeah, and I know Shawn Michaels wants to take that one back too, but his career is something I can look at and say, by far, it's probably had the most impact on people in terms of a character and storyline. My next, and I'll go right into the one they've already talked about, is John Cena. I think a couple of these people for us were locks. So I think John Cena and Undertaker, if they're not on your Mount Rushmore, not to say that it's incorrect, but I think those are the two probably most impactful folks in wrestling. Undertaker for story. John Cena is someone that I think can go toe-to-toe with any single person in any era on the mic. And he also is someone that really developed himself into feuds that he became a better wrestler. And that was more towards the back end of his career in terms of being a full-time person. I think about the feuds with AJ Styles. Those three matches, I think, were some of the best matches I've ever seen Cena in. And I think his feuds, as Sean said, with Edge and with Randy Orton, really also, and with Kurt Angle, defined our childhood and definitely defined Cena's career as three of the most impactful people that he's ever faced. And I think it's hard to not mention the best people in wrestling without mentioning John Cena. And yeah, I'll turn it over to you guys. John Cena's a lock, absolute lock for me.
So for my number 3, I'm going to go Triple H. And for the longevity factor and is what he does on both in-ring and also on the creative side. So basically, in-ring, what he did, 14-time world champion, 7 WrestleMania main events, also European champion 2 times, 5-time Intercontinental champion, won the Royal Rumble twice in 2002 and 2016. And to me, he was the master of being the most hated heel, especially primarily during the Evolution days, which he was created to me was probably the greatest faction during the Ruthless Aggression era, which consisted of Ric Flair, Randy Orton, Batista. In that time period, when he was world champion, when you were a little kid growing up, all three of us especially, we hated his guts.
Absolutely.
Anytime he won, it burned a hole in you every single time, anytime he would retain. And when he was a babyface, he's one of the most hilarious dudes possible. It's a natural. Some people, I feel like you have to have some acting skills where you have to go to the school of learning with your promos. Everything. Triple H to me was an all-around natural. He could do the babyface gimmick, the heel gimmick, and then also as far as factions Evolution I was just talking about, he's also part of corporate ministry, leader of the Authority, the McMahon-Helmsley era, which is very iconic. And then as far as the creative side with NXT Developmental, started in 2012. And to me, around like 2018, 2019 was probably the hottest thing going for him with like guys like Johnny Gargano, Adam Cole, basically the input. And we actually, all three of us ended up going to NXT Brooklyn for WrestleMania weekend. To me, it was one of the greatest shows that we attended, and arguably one of the top 3 matches we ever seen with Adam Cole versus Johnny Gargano. So what Triple H does with his promos, the storylines, the WrestleMania main events, the importance, and then what he did as far as taking over control with the company, like all of those things combined is the reason why I have him in my Mount Rushmore.
Yeah, my third is going to be John Cena, as the other two have him as well. He's a lock. He went 10-5 at WrestleMania. He's top 5 in most wins in WrestleMania history at 10. He was voted number 1 by PWI 3 times. Nobody else has ever done that 3 times. It was 2006, 2007, and 2013. So that just goes to show that there was a 6-year stretch where he wasn't number 1, and then he was back on top, and that was kind of towards the end of his full-time career. So yeah, I mean, he started off as Thugonomics. We loved him rapping. He was hilarious. And then I remember being so excited when he won the championship from JBL at WrestleMania 21. And
What a moment.
that moment right there just was the rest of his career. Just championships on top of championships, 16 times. I'm surprised he hasn't won the 17th, and I don't know if he ever will. I hope he's at WrestleMania this year, hoping he faces Theory. That would be great. But yeah, John Cena, he's got to be a lock on everybody's Mount Rushmore. And then, if we're doing snake style, I got my 4th. This was a tough one for me. I've gone back and forth since we said we were going to start this podcast between 2 people, and it came down to last night for when I finally made my decision. My 4th, Triple H. I picked Triple H to be in my Mount Rushmore. Like Sean said, 9-time WWE champion, 5-time world champion. He was PWI twice, which is right behind John Cena for the most. He was PWI in 2000 and 2009, voted number 1. He's won the King of the Ring, 2 Royal Rumbles, like Sean said, 7 main events at WrestleMania. And something about Triple H is he actually has the most losses in WrestleMania history at 14. He is 10-14 at WrestleMania. He has the second most appearances in WrestleMania history to The Undertaker. And like Sean said, just he's been a member of so many different factions that are important in wrestling history. He started early in the Attitude Era, built himself up to win his first championship in, I think, 1999. And then he kind of carried the Attitude Era. He got hurt. He came back, carried the Ruthless Aggression Era. He's just been in every era, and he's been such an important factor in every era. And it was very hard decision for him and somebody else, but I couldn't leave him off. So Triple H is on my Mount Rushmore, number 4.
That's good. And for my 4th, this was very tough for me. I was flip-flopping all night with it, and so it came down to one of 2. And to me, the 2 most important are The Rock and Stone Cold as far as like drawing an audience in a crowd. So I did go with The Rock as my number 4. 10-time world champion, 2-time Intercontinental, 5-time tag team. He was a 2000 Royal Rumble winner, Triple Crown champion as well. And to me, I think he's the greatest talker ever in terms of whether it's his catchphrases, the promos, backstage segments. He was just a natural on the mic. He was entertaining, hilarious as a babyface. And then when he did turn heel, 2003, like it was when he was basically bald, had the tattoos and everything like that. It was one of the greatest times, whether it's with the Hurricane backstage, like any person he worked with, it was a gold segment. He had 2 of probably the best rivalry was with Stone Cold, and 2 of the best matches are coincidentally our 2 favorite Manias, WrestleMania 17 as well as WrestleMania 19. And what he did, and then when he basically took that long hiatus for Hollywood, he came back like he never left. Most people sometimes, like, you'll come back after a long period and, like, you won't be as relevant or the crowd will kind of forget about you. Loudest pop I've ever seen, 2011 when he came back. And feuded with John Cena during that time period, 2 WrestleMania matches, both great matches. He also feuded with CM Punk, ended up winning the WWE Championship from CM Punk. And he's had many different appearances as well. And every single time I just feel like he's just so over with the crowd. So him and Stone Cold, to me are this go over with the crowd the most, and I slightly gave the edge to Rock because I think he's a little bit of a better wrestler than Stone Cold. So that was what the deciding factor was with the nod, because around the same time period, they wrestled the same time. Stone Cold did have an unfortunate neck and back injuries, which kind of didn't really help his case a little bit, but I love them both, but I had to slightly go with The Rock on my fourth one.
So for my last one, and as we said, it's very hard to get down to 4 people. The way I separated my Mount Rushmore was who I thought the best was in specific areas. And for this man, I think he is the best wrestler of all time, and I don't think it's that close. My last spot is for Shawn Michaels. Shawn Michaels, to me, in terms of wrestling ability, is the best that I've ever seen. The feuds that man was in also, you know, a lot of these people are in feuds with each other, so Triple H, Undertaker. The best match at WrestleMania was by Shawn Michaels and The Undertaker at WrestleMania 25. I also think that that was one of my worst moments to ever watch, when Undertaker went over the top rope, and I thought he literally broke his neck. So I think that Shawn Michaels was also someone that was very underrated in terms of promo work. I thought he talked fantastic. He was a great solos guy. He was in DX. They don't call him Mr. WrestleMania for nothing. I think his matches were just absolute quality, and he also it was in the first ladder match at WrestleMania. He had a lot of moments that were also, I think, just underrated, but he also is someone that got hurt and had 2 separate careers, in my opinion. So he came back in 2002 after the injury. And for me, that growing up, like, I never really got Shawn Michaels until 2002, and then I had to go back and watch all of his stuff. So for me, Shawn Michaels, in terms of wrestling, like, if we're talking about a Mount Rushmore of just wrestlers, he's by far and away the best. He just brought so much of that. For me, I have to put him on. I think the biggest struggle for me was putting him over a guy like Triple H. And I'll hop into my honorable mentions now. So Triple H for me, let me go over Shawn Michaels' accomplishments as well, because I didn't do that. So 4-time world champion, WWF championship 3 times, world heavyweight once, 2-time Rumble winner, and the first man to win the match at number 1, which I think is a huge accomplishment. The first Grand Slam champion and the 4th Triple Crown champion. Hall of Fame inductee as a singles and as part of DX. He won a Pro Wrestling Illustrated Match of the Year record vote 11 times. I did actually not know this before this section. And his match against John Cena in 2007 was ranked by WWE as the best match ever aired on the company's flagship Raw show. And I think that's really important to know when you're talking about wrestling. Shawn Michaels has those awards because the quality of his matches, even if they weren't booked the best, he always made the best out of it. And potentially one of the best finishers of all time. It's so simple now because everyone does kicks and everyone does super kicks and all that stuff. But that originated. Also one of the best theme songs of all time. And we have some funny stories from that. But
Way too many.
Shawn Michaels, to me, is on my Mount Rushmore. The biggest honorable mention for me is the guys they've already talked about is Triple H. Triple H and Shawn Michaels were the ones I was deciding between. Triple H, I think, can be talked about in-ring as, again, one of the people that I absolutely hated growing up because I was supposed to. When you're younger, I feel like you take wrestling with, like, exactly how it is, so you're supposed to hate the bad guys. If I was my age back in the day of Triple H, I would be loving Triple H. I'd be like, I love the heels. Like, give me Triple H more. That man won the title, and I was so pissed every single pay-per-view I walked out that man was champion. And specifically, there are specific moments I can name you that are specific people. I wanted to beat him so bad. New Year's Revolution 2005, when it was the Elimination Chamber against Randy Orton, Batista, Chris Jericho, Chris Benoit, and I forget the last person.
Batista right?
Was in it. Jericho, Chris Benoit, Randy Orton.
Triple H.
Who am I missing? Triple H. And who was the last guy? Doesn't matter.
Doesn't matter.
We'll come up with it later.
Yeah.
But that, I just remember being so anticipatory for Randy Orton to win that match when I was younger. And then I was just absolutely devastated when he lost. And that also plays into when Evolution broke up and, Triple H destroyed Randy Orton. But that's an example of, like, during that time, I wanted Triple H to lose. I wanted them to lose. Also, the long-term booking with Batista during that whole feud was one of the things that was, like, absolutely incredible. And I see them doing more now for more storylines because Triple H is in charge. He understands the efforts of long-term booking, which I think is very important. So that's my first honorable mention.
So for my first honorable mention, I'm going to go with Stone Cold. And he was the guy, him and Rock to me were the two guys that held down the Attitude Era. And their match at WrestleMania 17, even when Stone Cold turned heel, like, he basically drew a reaction. And that's the most important thing when you're in the sports entertainment business, whether you have the wrestling ability of a Shawn Michaels or you could draw an audience. Stone Cold, obviously not the best wrestler, but he was good enough in his prime. He had one of the best matches with Bret Hart, which is most people rank it as the greatest match ever. So to me, what he did on both, like, the promo side as well as the importance that he drew during that Attitude Era, to me basically had me in to put him up there as far as an honorable mention.
Yeah, my first honorable mention, which is the tough time that I had picking the fourth spot, is Shawn Michaels. It is so hard for me to leave him off of the list because of exactly everything Jeremy said. Shawn Michaels is by far the greatest wrestler of all time. Something that I thought was surprising was he was only ranked number 1 by PWI once in 1996, which was actually really shocking. And I know he did have an injury for a period of time. But if you're the greatest wrestler of all time, I really thought he would be ranked more than that.
Very true.
Which is interesting. But yeah, I mean, he had big money feuds with so many people that I can't even think of off the top of my head. I mean, I loved his feud with Triple H in 2004. 2003 going into 2004. Specifically at Royal Rumble, they had that last man standing match, which led to a great feud heading into WrestleMania 20, which is also one of my favorite pay-per-views of all time. And then the next year he came back and wrestled probably the second greatest WrestleMania match of all time against Kurt Angle. So the man just delivers every time he's in that ring. He never takes a night off. Yeah, Shawn Michaels was a very hard one to keep off my list, but he's an honorable mention for me. Which leads into my next one, is somebody who I wish he had a match against but never did, is The Rock. So they never had a singles match against one another. And like Sean said, The Rock and Stone Cold are very similar in a lot of ways. The Rock is a 10-time champion. He has been actually a part of 11 WrestleManias, which is a lot because there's a lot of breaks and gaps in between his matches. He's beaten 3 of the greatest of all time at WrestleMania, being Stone Cold, Hulk Hogan, and John Cena. I mean, he's probably the only person that has ever done that I can think of off the top of my head, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, one of the greatest mouthpieces of all time. He can talk against anybody. He is another guy who could wrestle in any generation, and we've kind of seen that since the 90s going into now. Hopefully he's facing, the Tribal Chief this year. We'll see. But yeah, The Rock is another one who's an honorable mention for me, and he was tough to leave off the list as well.
Sean, do you have another?
I do. So I actually have 3 total, but I'll just say my last 2 here. So HBK for sure. Basically, what Chris and Jeremy already reiterated, greatest in-ring wrestler I've ever seen between him and Kurt Angle. Guy always delivered every match. Very underrated match to me with WrestleMania was him and John Cena at WrestleMania 23. I thought that one was a really explosive match. Every rivalry he was in, my favorite ones in particular, Undertaker. He had some good ones with Bret Hart, Randy Orton. Also, as far as groups, D-Generation X is one of the most iconic groups. So what he did with Triple H when their tag team or when they were feuding around the 2002, I remember their street fight in 2002 was one of the greatest matches I've ever seen. So what he did in the ring alone, and like Jeremy also mentioned, very underrated talker. And then basically going back to what Chris said, guy always delivered. Every match he was in, he never took a night off. And then for my final one, might surprise you both with this one, but the longevity factor and the fact that he always redefined himself in every era, like in all the groups he was in, Randy Orton.
That
So-
doesn't shock me. Yeah,
Okay.
he's on mine. Yeah, he's on mine.
Oh, perfect,
I think we
sweet.
can all agree the
Yeah.
is
Has
definitely
to
an
be.
honorable mention. But I
Yeah.
do think when you're talking to a lot of people, when you're talking about this, is Randy Orton probably does not come up on a lot of people's lists for even like an honorable mention. And then you look him up and see what his actual accolades are, and you realize his body of work and also his ability to be on the mic. And that man seems to be timeless. Yes, he is injured right now, but he is also someone that works at like a slow, like slithery pace and understands like the mental game of wrestling. And I think in everything, it's amazing. Another thing that watching one of his documentaries, the Evil documentary on him, he knows how to turn it on and off and what to do, and you know, it's incredible for him to get into this character. And I think that he is someone that still has a lot left from what as long as this injury like doesn't affect his career like it could potentially. He said he wanted to sign another 5-year contract, and that was like a year or two ago. So that man still has a lot left, I think, to deliver. And I think to Chris's point when he was talking about Cena breaking, the Flair record for titles, I think Orton could potentially do it if he gets that many opportunities. I'm not sure in that amount of time. But I do think Randy Orton is definitely up there in my honorable mentions as well. I also had The Rock on my honorable mentions. Again, what they said, mouthpiece. The man's in Hollywood for a reason. He started that Hollywood career as a wrestler. He really, every time that, again, another guy that if you don't know wrestling, you probably know The Rock. And you may even know The Rock a little bit more than Stone Cold these days because he's so popular in mainstream media. He is just very iconic in his own way. And I think that he has to be on this list. The other one I want to mention, and I think it's an interesting one, but he's also not in WWE anymore, is Chris Jericho.
Another one I had.
I think that Chris Jericho is another guy that seems to be always reinventing himself in every different way. Is one of the funniest guys I've ever heard on the mic in terms of talking. He can take a stupid thing like your name is on the list and literally make it one of the most comedic segments I've ever seen. I just can't stop laughing. And I think Chris Jericho, in a sense, helped a whole new wrestling company survive just based on his name. Because at this point, Chris Jericho is not, the A wrestler, the B plus A minus A wrestler that he was back in the day. But that man can carry any promo. He also has so much knowledge of the wrestling business that has helped AEW survive in this time and be able to thrive. And making him the first champion was the best thing AEW did to really carry that beginning for them. Because that man, just put him on their back. Also, the most singable entrance song ever. I think that goes underrated. That man, you can just play his music and everyone in the crowd will sing. I mean, he had a whole entrance with no song, and people sang his song.
Should
I
have
think
put
Chris
him. We
Jericho
should have put him as the GOAT. All three of us should have put him up there. And the fact
I
that he
think
was one of
has
the
to be on there.
And the fact that he was one of like the first ones to develop like the TV show, like the highlight reel. He was one of the first superstars to incorporate that in the mix, which I think was very iconic growing up. And some of the most iconic wrestling skills, very underrated. I feel like as great as he is, I feel like he still doesn't get his due by most fans for his wrestling ability. And he's had many great rivalries with The Rock, Stone Cold, John Cena, like you name it. Then he goes into AEW, first ever AEW champion. How he mentors the younger talent, even like the older guys, like John Moxley. Then like he's got Sammy Guevara. He has his own stable right now. So everything that he participated, everything he touched, he turned to gold. So I think in both companies, WWE and AEW, the longevity factor, guy's still going strong at 54 years old. So definitely
Just
he's always
lost,
in that
30
conversation.
pounds, like to
Crazy.
reinvent
Yes.
his body.
Exactly.
Yeah. My final two guys were ones that were just said, Randy Orton and Jericho. And Randy Orton, I mean, he's had the third most WrestleMania appearances in history at 18.
Wow.
He's 8-10 at WrestleMania. And then like Chris Jericho, he was the first ever undisputed champion in WWE ever. He beat The Rock and Stone Cold in the same night. Like Jeremy said, first ever AEW champion.
Youngest at the time.
Youngest at the time, the youngest AEW champion at the time,
Exactly.
and 9-time Intercontinental champion. He has been in so many different promotions. He's been in WCW, WWF, WWE. He went to New Japan and fought there. Now, like, he has kind of carried a new company, like Jeremy said, just because of his name, just because he's Chris Jericho. So those two guys you can make an argument for, but like you guys said, they're probably left off a lot of people's lists.
Yeah, and I think those accomplishments for Jericho, those are just the ones, an AEW champion, but he's been ROH champion. There's so many accolades that he has that if you actually look through the list, when I did this, I was like shocked at how many titles he's won and how many different promotions he's been in. It is really astounding. And I do think in order for him to get his due, my hope is at the end of his career, he's able to really like seal it with a bow. I know some people have come out and said, I think it was Kurt Angle, he's one of the GOATs of wrestling, because it's absolutely true. And that's great. And so that's our Mount Rushmore. So again, in the comments, definitely interact with us and, let us know what yours is. Again, sorry to Hulk Hogan and the Ric Flair fans and the older fans. We don't discriminate against the older fans here, but this
Step
is
under
our
the giant.
era when we this is our era of when we watch wrestling and what's for us what would be that Mount Rushmore. And I think in terms of how we're looking for in the future, we're going to do a lot of things like this. Like I said, we're going to go over the women's Mount Rushmore as well, which I think we'll have some interesting takes for, and I think is actually a little bit harder sometimes than the men's. And we're also going to do a lot of the top stuff. So look out for a few different segments from there. Next episode will be our Royal Rumble predictions. So we're going to go over the matches, talk about what we like, what we don't like, who we're going to pick for the matches, some outcomes. There is so much speculation going into this Saturday for Royal Rumble. We are very excited. We hope you are very excited. And we will see you for our predictions episode next. Thank you all. Have a good one.
Thank you.